Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here, you all, and thank you so much to the UNM Institute for American Indian Education, Dr. Glenaba Martinez, for inviting me to speak. This is a story that I've really wanted to share, and I've worked very hard to share. Um, and it's titled, oh, and also just want to say hello to folks out there. I know we've got some mental health folks as well as education folks on board. And this is going to be a very collaborative conversation because I have to rush through some of the background context pieces. So I actually really hope that folks will add into the chat when they are an expert or very knowledgeable on certain pieces that I just throw in, like for an instant, like add into the conversation, please. And I always love like just general hellos from you all to know who you are, what lands you're coming from. So this is DEI leadership in mental health in schools. I called it frying pan to fire. I don't know how many of y'all have worked in DEI leadership positions, but it feels a little bit like you're jumping into a frying pan, and then like literally any move that you make, you're in fire. And this, I've thought this has changed so much. Like I have no clue where we're at right now because our larger political scene has been rapidly changing every moment, every day. So I'm glad that you all are showing up for this conversation. So I just also want us to take a big deep breath together and give thanks to our land. So one big deep breath, everyone together. Just to acknowledge the lands that we come from, the lands we're raised on, the lands we may live and work and play on, and the original caretakers of the lands where we are at. This is probably the slowest you'll see me because the rest of this, I have so much to say, you're gonna have to work hard to keep up. So they already introduced me. I'm not going to spend much time, except my husband is the Dene Nation. We do have a ninth grade daughter. Um, and I was raised in Golden, Colorado by a single white mother. And you'll see these first few slides, we're going to zip through them. That's why you got to throw in information in the chat for me. Also, just want to point out that my own education as a student, I've gone through many different types of schools, public, private, independent schools when I was in Colorado. And I had a wonderful time at a private school from fourth to eighth grade that really shaped a lot of who I am. And today we're going to talk about a specific case with Bosque School, but I'm not going to say like a whole lot about the details. There should be a link provided to some of the information on a blog through the ACLU New Mexico that hopefully you all have checked out either before coming, otherwise please check it out after. But we'll use that as sort of a springboard to be able to look at racism in schools in general, and also what we can do to move towards healing and justice in schools. The picture is Dr. Jones's model, Gardner's Tale on Racism. Please look it up. I also am providing information on that in links. But really, why education? Why do we send our kids to school? And why a private school? Because I'll be telling a story about a private school. And when I had to really look down into that, for me, I had to be real. It's greater access to power and resources. We want that for our kids in general. Education is one of the ways that we're seeing that operates in society, or we're hoping that operates, although there is a difference in how it operates with students of color. And also for private schools specifically, there's a level of access to a type of social networking in very influential circles. And anyone who has information on Dr. Jones's model, please feel free to put it on the chat. For me, it comes alive when I was first at the University of New Mexico, teaching the master's in special education program and teaching at the same time. It was at Washington Middle School. When I was at Bosque School, this was a year after the shooting that had happened at Washington Middle School. And this is a picture of Bosque School. To me, it really highlights the model that Dr. Jones gives us on racism in particular and the different soils that our children find themselves in. So even before going there, as I was there at Bosque School, my question to myself, is DEI at a private school an oxymoron? There was a lot that was really appealing to me about Bosque School, going in and especially going into the position or looking at the position of DEI director. And one of them was that Bosque School has to adhere to the National Association of Independent Schools Equity and Justice guidelines, which means that they need to have a DEI person on the leadership team with the training authority and support needed to influence key areas in the school. There was a lot of great stuff I was able to do while at Bosque School. Oh my gosh, I think in all of our communities, our school communities, we have really brilliant students, we have really brilliant educators. And I was able to do a lot of great things like a land acknowledgement on the opening day by a local Native medicine person, lunches and student groups focused on equity leadership, community organizations from around that are serving specific cultural groups that were able to come in and visit monthly, and we provided foods for students and educators and parents to be able to listen to these community organizations. I was able to present at national conferences. School-wide community listening sessions were really awesome to attend to and really get student involvement and what they thought was important to know about the school community, both the needs and the strengths. Indigenous Peoples Day celebration, bilingual and diverse students. There was so much, a lot of these pictures trying to show just a little bit of some of the really awesome activities and engagement that students and parents and educators had while I was there. But I had to, as I was working in this position as Equity, Community, and Culture Director and working on fostering inclusivity for students and faculty, I met a lot of resistance and ultimately was undermined and retaliated against. And this is the story I will go into in a little bit more detail. But you need to put this in context. So please add into the chat if you know these pieces. We know what our educational systems were founded on here in the United States. And when we're talking about Native students in particular, they're founded on inequity. And type of inequity is so brutal, it robs us of humanity. And we need to understand those contexts when we're thinking about education. This is the US education has been exported around the world. Check out YouTube, on YouTube, Schooling the World, and how it's impacted Indigenous populations worldwide. And if you know the history of some of these images, please share on the chat. We also need to think about the history of DEI over time and where it started, from human rights in pre-20th century all the way up to the present day of the DEI purge and ban by the federal government. And if we look at education specifically, again, I can't really go into detail, but I know you all will add into the chat of what this looks like over time in the schools. There's so much context that's so important to understand any current situation. I think it's also important for you all to know that as a psychologist, a licensed clinical psychologist coming into this position, I also have a professional ethic that I adhere to. If we have psychologists with us in the group, which I know Dr. Sean Haynes is in there, I saw her. There's many other folks possibly. Please add in about ethics codes. But for me, one of the biggest beneficence and non-maleficence, meaning I have to benefit those with whom I work and take care to do no harm. And this guides my actions and decision-making. And it comes even when this is counter to the law. So as we know now, legal aspects of DEI work are changing. It doesn't matter. I am obligated to an ethical code that does not allow me to enact harm on folks. I think it's also important to understand racism in schools and how it impacts mental health. Again, there's a lot of research out there. I'm going to pull out one of these. We know from research, attempted suicide is 2 times greater for students of color who experienced racism in school than those who never experienced racism. There's internalizing, externalizing consequences to racism in schools, substance use, depression, suicide, among those. Some of you are familiar with models like this, levels of racism. And we also need to think about like where racism fits within schools. And it's not just racism, it's about power and hierarchies. And that this is a part of our educational systems and how they were founded. Also, I think it's important to bring in my own intersectionality when I come into a leadership position like this. A few years ago, the count was about 350 Native American psychologists in North America. There's 0.13% of therapists who identify as Native American in our workforce in the US today. We are minuscule. I am the only Quechua psychologist PhD level in North America. When I was going through my graduate program, one of my professors gave me this advice when there was a lot of stuff going on within the program and where I was experiencing a lot of flashback. She said, "You are small and brown. People expect you to be quiet and meek. When you are not, they get upset. So just by the fact that I'm walking into spaces with who I am, I'm breaking stereotypes." And that's a lot of you all out there too, who are here right now. You're breaking stereotypes. I had a choice in this situation, we will get to a little bit more about it, whether to go a lawsuit route or be able to share this story. While I did engage a legal process, many people I know in my line of work and beyond, as educators, psychologists, or mental health specialists, other folks in professional fields, we end up being silenced. And that silencing happens without doing the legal route, and it happens with the legal route. That's not a judgment on anyone. There's many, many reasons that most of us will not be able to speak. In my case, the New Mexico Human Rights Bureau did find probable cause that I was retaliated against while at Bosque School, while trying to address a specific incident of discrimination. I made a choice not to pursue further litigation, even though I could have, especially with that Human Rights Bureau decision, because I knew the likelihood of being silenced was much greater, and I wanted this story to be shared. And that said, out of respect for some of my former colleagues, students, minimal legal considerations, and to avoid retaliation, I'm not getting into specific details. And I also think it's really important to go this route because unfortunately our law system is about right and wrong. And it's more about power than about repair, healing, and growth. ACLU is bucking that by helping to find me a way to be able to provide this story rather than go through a legal route that would either potentially completely silence me or not do the repair that's needed in the broader level. A little bit of context. The equity, community, and culture is how Bosque School deems its DEI work, and it specifically states we are committed to proactively engaging in anti-racist work. Some of what I present you will be more general because I don't want to speak too specifically and because a lot of my professional work has been with schools in many different levels. But generally, as a DEI director, you work both with the academic educational side, this is with private schools, and with the operations side of things. With Bosque School, when I was hired, that was the starting point. And I came really with a big background of working with a lot of communities on assessing first and really listening to communities. What are communities saying, all sectors of the community, about what is working for them, what is what are their struggles? What are their areas of need? What are the strengths that they want to build on? And this is an approach I took, seeing what data might be available, but also just talking with parents, talking with students, talking with educators, talking with the broader community, talking with everyone who's a part of that school community. And then events will happen all throughout when you're in a position like this. And I had to figure out when an event happens. Does it at all have anything to do with equity, community, and culture? And if it does, how does it fit into the picture that the community has been building with me about what their particular strengths and needs and wants are, what they want to see for change? So, the first event that might happen, it's an observation. You're observing, you're figuring out how it fits into everything. There was another event that I wrote about in the blog briefly. It was a report of past racism by a former alumni. And it went out to, it was an open letter. Now, this is another piece of the puzzle and helps to be able to really identify what does this look like? Because at this point, I've been hearing a lot about needs and strengths, but what does it actually look like here in this community? And here was an example of, oh, okay, this is how it actually comes to play. At that point, we can grow slow change. I really like to work from the most important thing is relationship building first. How do we get and communication? How do we communicate better with each other so that we're really hearing and listening to each other? And how do we strengthen our relationships, especially across where we don't think we have any common interests or we have a harder time seeing eye to eye, like building relationships, community building. That's really where I wanted to be at. And when there's no crisis, you can move through some of those change processes when you want to enact equity a little bit more slowly. But then there was another event that was a report on current racism that was happening in the school. And not only was I then trying to figure out how does this fit with the things that I know, the things that I've already seen, do they all connect in some way? Is this creating some kind of pattern that needs to be worked on? But then also, like, is this like a valid report? I wasn't there. You need to actually follow up and see. So that's the exploring. How severe was this? How many were students impacted? If so, was it one? Was it several? Was it a lot of them? Who else was impacted? What types of follow-up may have already happened? What things are in place when something like this happens? What can we do to go forward? You're doing a whole sort of assessment along with some of these growth pieces. So that's the exploration, then it becomes problem identification and conflict resolution. But the moment that I found out, oh, there was another, when another event happens, immediately after this, that then seems very relevant. And then documentation, clear documentation of harm to students comes to light. That's when it becomes a crisis. When the harm is there and when that harm is at threat of continuing forward, if something is not done immediately, that is the point where I decided to elevate this report, this incident of racism, to be able to respond to it immediately. And this is then the point where retaliation occurred. Some of you may ask, what does retaliation look like? And the hard part about that and why there's not many cases that go forward on retaliation, because it's really hard to identify when it's happening. There's a lot of vague things that it can feel like are happening, whether it's somehow someone else needs the furniture in your office now and it's being moved away, or resources that you were told you were going to have, but then they get moved to someone else, or meetings that have always been at this and this time, and there's always like a documented like list of like what you're going to discuss on that meeting, and then all of a sudden it gets changed on you, and then people are not showing up to that meeting because all of a sudden it turns into HR coming and saying, we need to talk about your work ethic. There's a lot of aspects of retaliation, or saying that when folks are saying that, okay, we're going to follow up with this way and this way at this time, don't worry. And and then it doesn't happen. And then you ask, and like, oh, well, we're going to do it at this time. And it keeps getting pushed, and it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And then if I am the one who is responsible for making sure that the follow-up happens, but then it's not happening, then I am being stymied from actually doing any effective action. And I become a part of the harm continuing. Oh, I think it's also important to understand, well, actually, I might get to this at another one too. That part of my not being able to talk was because there was an NDA. And I had to sign that NDA when I was brought on to Bosque School, which generally seems appropriate, especially as a psychologist. I'm not going to be sharing specific information about specific students or, private information in general. But then when it gets put very clearly in front of you, when everything gets shut down, you're saying you're not coming back to work tomorrow, all of a sudden, it's very clear what that NDA is about. Nothing can be talked about. And this is something that was indirectly referred to on many occasions where nothing was able to be talked about. I do want to give a definition of racial trauma. It refers to events of danger associated with real or perceived experiences of racial discrimination. And it includes threats of harm and injury, humiliating and shaming events, and witnessing harm to others. We already briefly talked about mental health impacts of racism. This is a little bit more specific. I want to use this experience and many other experiences because this is not unique. We all know Yazzie Martinez exists in the state of New Mexico because we've had a lot of struggles. But again, we have built educational systems on systems of injustice. And so I want us to expand out to think about how do we see racism in schools and its impacts, and then how do we work with that? Now, we have some pretty good policies, although whether they get followed or not is another question, on racism that happens between students. So one student that enacts discrimination on another one. We generally have good policies on if an educator is enacting some kind of racism on a student. Take, for example, Cibola incident with the teacher who cut the Native student's hair and said derogatory terms. It would seem pretty clear cut. We have some pretty clear evidence around like how to follow through. I was shocked that at first this was not decided in favor of the student, but ACLU New Mexico worked on this case as well, I think, that ultimately they appealed and it was won. Again, this is a blatant act of racism. Our schools have some systems in place for blatant acts of racism. It's much harder to figure out how to deal with microaggressions and with ongoing microaggressions that happen constantly. Like in one school where I was at, a student of color was being called monkey by their peers day in and day out. And it started with a curriculum on slavery. And when the kids were questioned about it, they're all, no, we're just teasing. And the kid who was being targeted, who didn't want to suffer, and only had a few kids access that they could relate with, knew that their protection was, yeah, it's okay. I don't mind it. They're just joking. So that's student to student and educator towards student. When it's educator towards another educator, that moves into the employment realm. And we do have laws around that as well. We more often see it when it's someone that's higher up in the employment realm that's enacting racism on someone that's more subordinate. Okay, so let's start with this example of a white educator who is targeting and belittling educator of color. Now, what we know with racial trauma, then, it's harming students of color. And that can be mental health, clear behaviors and examples of mental health impacts. And if it's multiple students that this is happening in front of, all of these students are being impacted. And the greater harm is often coming with students of color who are witnessing this. At this point, hopefully there's some stops to what's happening, that there's structures that are in place to deal with this. But the hard part is students have less power. And so if they say that something is happening and only they're the ones who witness it, how is it dealt with? Oftentimes those with less power are not taken as seriously. So if it is allowed to continue, then this, where it starts with the educator, this one educator is able to do this towards another educator, which then enacts harm on students who are witnessing it. And they aren't stopped. If there's no response to this or no way to approach it, then that gives that educator permission to continue it on. And that gives that permission to actually continue the behaviors even towards other colleagues of color. And when other educators who are there do not do anything, whether they can't or they don't see it or they won't because they're afraid or because they're minimizing it, then those bystanders who don't act also enact harm on the students indirectly. And you can see that we're starting to fill up our environment with this. Now, really, it's the most senior, the leaders of the school community that have a lot of power in setting that culture and setting the consequences as well as the relationships, the positive aspects to prevent this. But if they do not act, then they also are enacting direct harm on the students. And that's the point where I found myself, because I was in that leadership role and was not able to enact some of the things that I knew were important in order to help protect the students that were being harmed and to change the situation. But when those things were not, I was not allowed, there was not support to be able to move forward on those, then I became a part of that harm to those students, and I could not. It also harms the educator of color who may have been the original target. And what happens? They drop out, they leave, they disappear. And that disappearance, again, impacts all of the students who are witnessing it. And it impacts the other educators of color and all educators in general, because now you can see we're building this environment. And again, now we're just expanding the amount of harm we're doing. And the ones who are most vulnerable to this, because they are required to go to school and required to sit in these rooms, are the students. And it's coming from the top down. That allows students to enact racism on each other because it's an environment where that's acceptable. And it allows more of this to happen, which we also don't talk about and don't have a lot of protections around, when students are enacting racism on educators of color. And all of this makes it really hard for our educators of color to stay in schools or to have to move from school to school. And that's why we see students dropping out, being pushed out, or also moving from school to school. And we've got to remember again that all of this is taking place in the context of an educational system that was designed this way, to take away resources from the most vulnerable, to allow genocide in order to do that. That's what originated our education systems: privilege and power over. So it's no surprise that our schools have this rampantly across them, and that we see them so impacting our students of color that we have to bring it to a lawsuit. But even Yazi Martinez is not able to get through this because we only focus on this one-on-one student to student or educator to student kind of racism. And we don't know how to deal with this vast amount that's actually happening. So people don't speak up. One of the biggest reasons is needing to survive. This may be happening over and over and over again, but we have to keep our jobs. We have to get the next job. So we aren't going to say anything because we need to have good recommendations in order to get another job and try and find hopefully a better place. Just like general, how do you survive in a world that's a pecking order world? Fear of losing privilege is another one. You know, when you actually get to a place, if you saw that picture of Bosque School compared to Washington Middle School, it's hard to lose out on something like that because we know our children need that rich soil to grow in. The law is something that silences us, not that we're breaking it, but the most vulnerable in a system is going to be more likely to be targeted and not win when it comes to the law. And general lack of power, like when our students are not able to say anything because teachers hold their grades in their hands and whether they can even graduate or not. And parents know this too. They know the repercussions that will happen to their students if they speak out. So I want to bring to light a couple of red flags around institutional racism. I think we all know these. It's just nice to have them consolidated a little bit. And there's a lot more you all can add into the chat if you want. But some of them that really came out strongly for me, if there is a person of color, whether at the educator level or the student level, who is always like this whole story around them is about how incompetent or bad they are, I would question that. If there's scapegoating that's happening, that's making one person the problem for everyone else, whether that's an educator of color, a student of color, or even like the white educator that might have sparked this, well, if they're being used as a scapegoat versus the whole system taking responsibility, that's an issue too, right? Most often, the scapegoats are the ones that are the most vulnerable, which is our educators of color, our students of color. And they're told, oh, that's just an isolated incident. And hiding patterns. You all may not see patterns at schools because systems know how to hide the patterns. So then they can say, no, oh, that was just like that person, right? Once you can start connecting the dots, that's where systems know they're in trouble. Not speaking about a person or shushing a room when it comes to them, that the individual or their actions. This is a red flag. What's happening? Not celebrating individuals or a pattern of people leaving or disappearing without the opportunity for closure. If you look at systems in general, I remember going through college and going, why are all the people of color disappearing from here? And it's like one day they're there and then they're not, right? In places of employment, great places of employment when folks who have worked there for like certain amount of time and people like really connected, and then they get celebrated when they move on to another position. But when it's a little bit creepy is when you're like, wait a minute, that person just disappeared. Oh, wait a minute, where did that person go? Why didn't we hear from them? Like we heard from this educator, this white educator when they left, and oh yeah, that white educator, yeah, we had this like great celebration. But all these they're all educators of color that just disappeared. Isolating faculty or students from each other so that you feel like you're in it alone and that you're the only one that's having to deal with it versus knowing, oh, wait, the other people are having the same experience. Indirect threats of power, redirecting resources away, taking away domains of duty, overly nice overtures or superficial kindness. You're my best, they're my best friend. I love them. When it starts to feel like over exaggerated and why is this so sweet and kind? That can be a red flag. How do we protect ourselves? As educators of color, one of the things that I'm grateful for my training as a psychologist is how to document. And one of the things I'm grateful in working just with communities in general, and why I document for communities is because our histories are important. And it shows when we go over a long period of time, we can look back because change can happen incrementally. But when you document the process, you can look back and go, wow, this is where we started from. So there's a lot of ways I've learned to document, and I didn't realize how important that documentation would be when someone tries to disappear you, or when folks are altering responses or the way events actually happened in front of you. And they're saying a whole different way of things that happened. All of a sudden, the way that I documented was really, really important in order to be able to share this story with you all today. Internal allies, building relationships with a lot of folks. And it's really like why I'm able to even share the little bit I have with you today about what happened, because there's a lot of folks, even though they may not be able to speak up directly with you all now, they found ways to speak up so that the pattern could be seen more. So there's a lot of folks that rose up through fear in order to be able to help bring this to light of what was happening. Coalition building, building allies across the spectrum. I would also offer that we shouldn't publicly criticize BIPOC people in the system, because we all, like, I think it's one of the heartbreaking things I saw with students of color in this place, educators of color. Everyone was walking such a fine line to try and maintain some level of access to their dreams without being harmed. Now, privately, among people of color communities, I think we can hold each other up to our own when we need to be more responsive to our communities and how it looks. I think publicly, I think we should shy away from criticism. Community involvement and support was vital, again, as I said. So, you know, everyone who's a part of a community, the way to maintain it, if DEI is something that we're trying to have happen in schools, change happens so slow. But there's so many of us, there's a number of us. And if we can get these groups going, they perpetuate themselves in within the schools and will keep on going regardless. And same with community groups outside of schools. Really, there was so much more support from outside too, and fostering stronger relationships between schools and community groups that are responsible to and really advocate for our communities of color. So vital to be able to have these stories be heard and not silenced, and for change to happen. I would really wish that we stop disappearing BIPOC educators. I think it's a huge contributor to what we see with student dropout and student push out, because, and this is in the research as well, because if you do not have the representation at the educator level, and we see why, we see what students are witnessing and what they're experiencing and how they are being harmed through that educational experience. That's what's contributing to the school push out. What I would love to see, I would love to see our institutions respond in situations like this with restorative justice, which is another reason I chose not to go the lawsuit direction. Restorative justice would look like an institution that could acknowledge what was happened, not shut it down, not scare people from talking about it, but actually acknowledge it, apologize. And don't leave the apologizing up to one individual that's scapegoated, but that the entire system can step up and apologize for what what has happened. They can name it, they can see it, they can apologize for it, because that's the only way we can start with repair. And repair is the other biggest thing we need in order to move forward. And when there's racism in schools, there is moral harm that is done with our students that needs to be repaired. It needs to be at the level of moral repair. And there's material harm. Students in classrooms that have experienced and witnessed racism time and again are afraid to be in that classroom. They're afraid to show up for school. They're afraid to ask for help from teachers. And they lose class time. They lose the ability to access that knowledge. Same with educators of color. If a consequence of racism, as we saw educators of color dropping out, being pushed out as well, they don't have a job. That's material repair that needs to be made. Restorative justice from an institutional side would also mean it's going to be done differently going forward, that there's immediate consequences from top down, from the leadership level down, to make sure that this is stopped early. There's community reinforcement as well, because we know change isn't going to happen if we don't also come from the community level and say, we demand this. So whether it's Bosque School community or any other school community, we all are a part of stepping up and saying, no, this is not acceptable. There need to be policy changes, and those policy changes from an institutional level, they need to specifically reach out to those individuals in communities most harmed to be a part of what that policy change looks like, and to learn from the past so that a better future can be developed. And storytelling needs to be a part of this, because repair is not only moral and material, but it means not being silenced. It means remembering our memories need to be kept, because that's what's going to hold institutions accountable and more accountable the next time. We also need curiosity and celebration at the margins of wherever we see folks pushed to the margins, that's where the most celebration needs to happen. So if we want to remember and we want to celebrate, why don't in all of our schools and educational systems, we have plaques that really showcase who these equity leaders have been? Because I guarantee you there's a pattern all over the place of equity leaders going in and out because they're pushed out quickly. But each time they're enacting change, and these are brilliant folks at the table. So how do we eradicate racism in schools? I'm going to speed this up so you guys have a little bit of time to talk. We need more protections all over the place. Every level, we need protections. And not just, I talked more about what happens after an incident, but we need to protect before these incidents happen. We also need our community around us holding schools accountable and also loving support. It's really all about love. We also need white allies and allies with power to be able to come forward. And ultimately, we need to look at changing the foundations of education. And I know you all who are part of American Indian education are doing this work. You're reimagining it to be based in Indigenous values, where it's not about hierarchies, but it's about collaboration, where the walls of school are taken down so that we can learn from our environments, from each other, from our communities, from love and from harmony and balance, and getting through conflict as a part of life, but as a part of growth. I envision community healing, such as a Be Well Summer Institute, Warriors for Equity Learning and Leadership. If anyone wants to fund that, help me develop it, let's talk. My motto at Bosque School was fear less, love more, because really it's about love. A lot of folks really cared about this, being able to hear these stories, because it allowed them to speak up too. At the time I was at this school, one individual told me I was the destructive force. This is a picture of Tupac Amaru, who was dismembered. Tupac Amaru too, also leading an indigenous resistance and revolt, not revolt per se, but just leading indigenous lifestyles and well-being and wellness and love, was beheaded. But what he said was, I will return and I will be millions. And why? Because of all of you who show up. Because of all of us educators, psychologists, all of us professionals of color, indigenous professionals, all of us unicorns. That fire, that's there for a reason. We grow, we regenerate, we create. And maybe some of the taking down of Department of Education, if we all stand up, let's recreate it then, and let's recreate it the way we want to. So let's grow it. Silence is complicity. Actions speak louder than words. Act up. And storytelling, that is action. Storytelling is education. Storytelling is healing. And story is creation.